Good morning, everyone. Well, I am recording this on the 4th of July, so you'll see it tomorrow. I read this all the time. A couple of these things I'm going to read for you today, but the flag part yesterday was just hit me first. You don't have to read about God out of the Bible. He exists everywhere. The people that founded this country were believers. The book of Esther, a great book of the salvation of God, doesn't mention the word God. He's self-evident, and we will see that. So I'm going to read two documents, not in their entirety. The first one is the Declaration of Independence. You need to go online and find it, but I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs, because they pretty much cover all that we need to know. So it was written and delivered in Congress on July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. We saw on the Battle of Fort McHenry that they had 15 stripes. They'd grown a little bit. But they made it to the 1800s. When in the course of human events, continuing to read, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station in which the laws of nature and the laws of God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And this part you should be familiar with. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Interesting wording, considering slavery was still in place. And slaves were all around the world. Black slaves here, white slaves in Africa. All over the place. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are installed among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of these people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizations, its powers in such form as to them shall most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms in which they are accustomed. But when the long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably, I'm getting distracted by squirrels chasing each other over there. Invariably, the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute disposition. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having a direct and object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let these facts be submitted to a candid world. And it goes on a list. He refused to his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. It goes on and on. Read it. And you see what these people were thinking and why we have the Declaration of Independence. Now, Rush Limbaugh, who died a couple of years ago, every year at this time, he used to read something that his father put together. The men who signed the Declaration of Independence. What happened to him? Well, another prominent man picked it up, and he wrote this piece, and I'm going to be reading probably most of this. He embellishes a little bit in some of the other areas, so I like his way of writing it. And when he wrote this, he starts off with, "My name is Don Pemberton, and today I want to talk to you about lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. My inspiration for this program came from a speech given by Rush Limbaugh Jr., he was the third, to our Rotary Club in 1965. The one that we listened to was the third. I think he's talking about the second. This friend was a World War II veteran who was a P-51 fighter pilot and squadron leader during the Pacific War. P-51s, strap yourself to a rocket. No doubt his efforts helped win the war. After the war, he came home, went to law school, and became a partner with his father, who was a prominent lawyer in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, I guess that is. This young man became a prominent lawyer, a civic leader, historian, and a great orator. Unfortunately, he passed away 15 years ago, talking about the other, Rush Limbaugh's father, because Rush Limbaugh, that we listened to, would give his father's speech. Many of you recognize the name of his son, Rush Limbaugh III, who is a conservative radio talk show host, 3 hours per day, 5 days a week. That's dedication. And yet, he talks about God, but his emphasis was to just simply help people. The remarks I listed to that day 45 years ago are a source of some of this report. Other sources are the internet and history books. Well, the internet didn't exist 45 years ago, so that has to be new. What happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? First, I would like to go back a few years and give you a little background. The first pilgrims came from Great Britain in November 1620. Now, we know that Columbus arrived here in 1492, that the Vikings were before that in the northern parts. But nobody was here. There was nothing here. They hadn't really developed anything. This is the first group to develop. And you think life was easy? They just pulled into town, rented an apartment, and settled in? No. These were dedicated men with one goal, to set up a country or a place that they could live with the freedom to worship God. So they landed at Plymouth Rock, which was a virgin country. No towns, stores, homes, and no people other than the indigenous, the Indians. Why the Indians? Because they were searching for the East Indian Trading Company. They thought they made it around the world to India, but they hadn't. There was abundant wildlife, and this was about the only source of food the first winter. Of the 104 who came on the first ship, the Mayflower, half died the first winter. Over the next 150 years, many more immigrants came, mostly from Great Britain and the 13 colonies were formed along the coast from Georgia to Massachusetts. Among the people we find farmers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, ministers, engineers, politicians, school teachers, and carpenters. By 1776, more than 2 million people lived here. Factories, schools, businesses were developed. Farming operations were expanded. A limited amount of government organized took place in each colony, and the delegates were appointed to represent the various colonies at the Constitutional Convention. No major rules or regulations could be implemented without approval of Great Britain, and this was the problem. Over the years, the Patriots built factories, produced many items for sale, expanded farming operations, and produced a surplus of farm products available for sale and trade. Under British rule, all items bought and sold in foreign trade had to be through Great Britain. Patrick Henry, whose speech we're familiar with, he ended his speech to the Virginia Convention in 1775 to react to British opposition. If life is so dear, or peace so sweet, that has to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery, forbid it, Almighty God. I know what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. So delegates of the Constitutional Convention in June of 1776 discussed a Declaration of Independence, freedom from Britain, so they can make their own laws and regulations, to become united and willing to fight if necessary to preserve their freedom. They wanted to be able to sell their own commodities and engage in trade with other countries without being taxed by Britain. So 56 men from the colonies were delegates to the Constitutional Convention in early June 1776. They appointed a committee of 5 to write down the Declaration of Independence, part of which I just read earlier. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams, Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Philip Livingston of New York, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania. Yeah, he was on it. These were all educated men and financially secure. As individuals, they had more to lose than to gain. They wanted what was right for their country. They selected Jefferson to write the document since he had a good reputation of putting words together. Some people have added things to the Constitution which are not there, or the amendments which are not there. Freedom from religion is not there. Make no law for or against you can find, but freedom from religion is never there. That's Satan's lie. When it was finished, it had been Ben Franklin who had checked and approved it. Then it was presented to the other delegates for adoption. The body of delegates for 3 days debated, discussed, added to and deducted from it, making 86 changes. They approved it on July 4th, 1776. After 2/3 of the colonies approved the document, it was presented to Great Britain and others interested. Britain was most unhappy. The 15 men did commit an act of treason against Great Britain by signing it. The penalty for treason was death by hanging. Ben Franklin Riley noted, "We must all hang together or we will most assuredly hang separately." By unanimous vote, the delegates pledged to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And they all lived up to that pledge. August 2nd, 1776, the delegates met again in Philadelphia and actually signed the Declaration of Independence. What happened to these 56 men? Well, that's what this is all about. What are you willing to give up for your country or for your people or for your God? Obviously in the reverse order. What kind of men were they who committed treason against Britain by signing the Declaration? Interesting that names like Washington, Hamilton, Patrick Henry were not among the signers. These men were elsewhere. Ben Franklin was 70. 18 were under 40. 3 were in their 20s. 24 were judges and lawyers. 11 were merchants. 9 were landowners, large landowners, and farmers. The 12 remaining were doctors, ministers, and politicians. With the exception of a few, Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, the men owned substantial property. They were men of means, and all but 2 had families. They were educated men, in good standing in their communities. They knew the penalty for treason was death by hanging, and also knew part of the British fleet was in the New York harbor. There was no draft cards to burn here. They simply asked for status quo. It was equality with the mother country they wanted. It was taxation with representation they wanted. We're going back to the British rule, don't you know that? Only we have a different king. 2 of these men became presidents of the United States, Jefferson and Adams. They're the ones who discussed a lot of this stuff privately. Those 2 did. It's in their letters where you can find the separation of church and state. They were trying to figure out how to implement it without taking away rights. 7 became state governors. 1 died as vice president. Several became senators. 1 from Philadelphia, the richest man in America, founded the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad. It was he, not Betsy Ross, who designed the U.S. flag, Francis Hopkinson. Even before the list was published, the British marked down every member of Congress suspected of having put this name to treason. All of them became the objects of vicious manhunts. Some were taken, like Jefferson, and had narrow escapes. All who had property and family near British strongholds suffered. The following paragraphs were left out of the WCM present due to time constraints. Francis Lewis, New York delegate, saw his home plundered and his estates, what is now Harlem, completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through efforts of Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across the Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Phillips Livingston had all of his great holdings in New York confiscated and his family driven out of their home. Livingston died in 1778, still working in Congress for the cause. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all of his timber, crops, and livestock taken. For 7 years he was borrowed from his home and family. John Hart of Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Haitian soldiers rode after him, and he escaped in the woods, while his wife lay dying on her deathbed. The soldiers ruined his farm, wrecked his homestead. Hart, 65, slept in caves and woods as he was hunted across the countryside. When at long last emancipated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife already had been buried and his 13 children taken away. He never saw them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family. Dr. John Witherspoon, signer, was president of the College of New Jersey, later called Princeton. The British occupied the town of Princeton and billeted troops in the college. They trampled and burned the finest college library in the country. Judge Richard Stockton, another Jewish delegate and signer, has rushed back to his estate in an effort to evacuate his wife and children. The family found refuge with friends, but a sympathizer betrayed them. John Stockton was pulled from bed in the night and brutally beaten by the arresting soldiers, thrown into a common jail, and he was deliberately starved. Congress finally arranged for Stockton's parole, but his health was ruined. The judge was released as an invalid when he could no longer harm the British cause. He returned home to find his estate looted and did not live there to see the triumph of the Evolution. His family was forced to live off of charity. Richard Morris, merchant prince of Philadelphia, delegate and signer, met Washington's appeals and pleas for money year after year. He made and raised arms and provisions which made it possible for Washington to cross the Delaware at Trenton. You've seen the picture. In the process, he lost 150 ships at sea, bleeding his own fortune and credit almost dry. George Clymer, Pennsylvania signer, escaped with his family from their home, but their property was completely destroyed by the British in the Germantown and Brandywine campaigns. Somebody's starting up their boat. You can hear the motor. Dr. Benjamin Rush, also from Pennsylvania, was forced to flee to Maryland. As a heroic surgeon with the Army, Rush had several narrow escapes. Benjamin Rush, I wonder if it's any relation. John Morton, Troy, in his views of previous to this debate, lived in a strongly loyalist area of Pennsylvania. When he came out for independence, most of the neighbors, even some of his relatives, ostracized him. He was a sensitive and troubled man, and many believed this action killed him. When he died in 1777, 1776 is when this came out. A lot of these men are dying within 2 to 3 years. His last words to his tormentors were, "Tell them that they will live to see the hour when they shall acknowledge it," the signing, "to have been the most glorious service that was rendered to my country." William Ellery, Rhode Island delegate, saw his property and home burned to the ground. Thomas Lynch, of South Carolina delegate, had his health broken from privation and exposures while serving as a company commander in the military. His doctors ordered him to seek a cure in the West Indies, and on the voyage, he and his young bride were drowned at sea. Edward Rutledge, Arthur Middleton, and Thomas Hayward, Jr., the other 3 South Carolina signers, were taken by the British in the siege of Charleston. They were carried as prisoners of war to St. Augustine, where they were singled out for indignities. They were exchanged at the end of the war, but the British, in the meantime, having completely devastated their land holdings and estates. Thomas Nelson, the signer from Virginia, was at the front in the command of the Virginia military forces. With British General Cornwallis in Yorktown, fire from 70 heavy American guns began to destroy Yorktown piece by piece. Lord Cornwallis and his staff moved their headquarters into Nelson's palatial home. While American cannonballs were making shambles of the town, the house of Governor Nelson remained untouched. Nelson turned to rage to the American gunners and asked, "Why do you spare my home?" "Sir, out of respect for you." Nelson cried, "Give me the cannon," and fired on his magnificent home himself, smashing it to bits. But Nelson's sacrifice did not quiet over. He had raised $2 million for the revolutionary cause by pledging his own estates. When the loans came due, a newer peacetime Congress refused to honor them, and Nelson's property was forfeited. He was never reimbursed, and he died impoverished a few years later at the age of 50. Of those 56 who signed the Declaration of Independence, 9 died of wounds or hardships during the war. 5 were captured and imprisoned, in each case with brutal treatment. Several lost wives, sons, and entire families. One lost his 13 children. 2 wives were brutally treated. All were, at one time or another, victims of manhunts and driven from their homes. 12 signers had their homes completely burned. 17 lost everything they owned, yet not one defected or went back on its pledged word. Their honor and the nation they sacrificed so much to create is still intact. This is not a modern letter. And finally, there is the New Jersey signer Abraham Clark. He gave 2 sons to the officers' corps in the Revolutionary Army. They were captured and sent to infamous British hulk afloat the New York harbor known as the Hell Ship Jersey, where 11,000 Americans were captured and were to die. The younger Clarks were treated with special cruelty because of their father. One was put in solitary and given no food. With the end almost in sight, with the war almost won, no one could have blamed Abraham Clark for ascending to the British request. When they offered him his sons' lives if he would recant and come out for the king of the Parliament, the utter despair in the man's heart, the anguish in his very soul, must reach out to every one of us down through the 200 years with his answer, no. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence proved that by their every deed that they made no idle boast when they composed the most magnificent curtain line in history. And for the support of the Declaration, with a firm reliance on protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each of our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I don't know if I'm going to read much longer. How are we doing on time? Oh, we got a little bit of time. The Declaration of Independence, signed by 56 brave patriots in 1776, has survived over 234 years. It was strengthened by the United States, of course, the timing of the letter here. It was strengthened by the United States Constitution in 1787, when the delegates of the Constitutional Convention agreed on a preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves, our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. During the Civil War in 1863, after the Battle of Gettysburg, President Lincoln was invited to say a few words at the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is interesting that Mr. Lincoln was given after the principal orator, Edward Everett, had spoken for 2 hours. Today, Mr. Everett's words are largely forgotten. However, Mr. Lincoln's speech is a little more than 2 minutes about the greatness of this nation and its challenges. It was so moving that it is printed in history books all over the nation and around the world, even translated into other languages. It is still quoted today. As far as I'm concerned, these documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Gettysburg Address, are the basis for the freedom we enjoy. Freedom is not free. Thank you for your attention. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. This was written and submitted May 29th, 2010 by Don Pemberton of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. As you celebrate today, remember the people that sacrificed their lives for it just to become a nation, let alone that have fought for it throughout the years. Celebrate, yes, but celebrate the lives of these original 56 signers. Britain is now our ally, at least has been. I don't know that anybody should be an ally of the United States today. We are not following any of the Founding Fathers' writings. We're not following the law. We're not following the Constitution. We have the Second Amendment because of the people that are running our government. And I'm not calling you to go to arms. I am not doing that. This is a spiritual battle. Remember that. We can't win this as a physical battle. Satan will tromp on you. Tromp, not trump. Tromp on you. I'm getting dripped on. This tree is still wet from the rain last night. This is a spiritual battle. Use only your armor of God to fight it. Jesus is coming for us soon, because he won't make us stay through this much longer. Most people haven't the stomach to do what these 56 did. And these weren't poor people. These weren't working people. These were well-off people. Remember them and their memories and the memory of the United States. We haven't always done good things. We've allowed bad things to happen. More so recently than in the past, but we still have. We had a civil war. Unconscionable people killing their brothers, their family, and their neighbors over something like slavery, which shouldn't have been in the first place. And they were really just the pawns in this game of chess, because there were slave owners in the North too. They just didn't want free or cheap labor. These big businesses up in the North caused the Civil War. That's why when they came south to Georgia and other places, they weren't so much killing people, they were killing soldiers. They were burning anything that looked like it could make money. They were burning. They burned mills, they burned everything they could, so that the South wouldn't be able to be a competitor anymore. If that isn't evil, I don't know what is. Let's lay all that aside for now. Celebrate the birthday of our country. If this is a day for refreshments, I don't drink anymore, but if I did, I would toast a beer to you, but it wouldn't be Bud Light. We're leaving soon, till we meet in the clouds. God bless.